Welcome back to Brothers in Boots. My name is Mike.
My name is Jeff.
Today we have the long-awaited Q&A session. So if you like this kind of content, and hopefully you do, because this content is 100% driven by you, the viewers, like, comment, and subscribe.
All right, so this is just a whole bunch of random stuff. Some of them are probably going to be great questions, and some of them are probably going to be more duh. We'll start with duh. What is leather?
Leather is just a skin that has been tanned through a process to give it a preserving quality, whether that's for softness, thickness, strength. It is essentially the preserving of skin to be used as another purpose.
Great answer. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah, and on the creepy note, you can get your tattoos tanned these days. You can set up beforehand so that if you die, they take the tattoo off your skin and literally tan it so that your relatives can keep your tattoo in a frame on the wall. That is a thing that you can get done.
What is tanning?
Tanning goes into that same section. It's a process of using different tanning agents, whether that's chromium salts, pine bars, oaks, tars, tannins, to impregnate those materials into the skin to preserve it. Not only does it preserve it, different types of tannings give different properties to the leather in terms of malleability, strength, stiffness, and like waterproof, corrosion prevention, so on and so forth. Also allows it to be molded and held shape too, if it's like a leather like Latigo or Latigo that's meant for like wet tanning and wet molding.
It can be plants, it can be flowers, it can be other parts of the tree, it can be leaves.
Yep.
It could be brain. We've discussed it already once in our videos that brain tanning is a possibility. Nobody professionally is doing it that I'm aware of.
Not
but
anymore, I don't think.
Brain,
yeah, I
brain
imagine
tanning.
EPA concerns too, and health and safety violations. But Indians is real common with the Indians when they did bison of using the brain matter as material as part of the tanning process to literally waste not.
Waste not, want not.
Yep.
And if you look at for the right YouTube videos, there's like back to nature, survivalists, people that want to live off the grid that will show you how they've used the brain to tan what they killed so that they can use it. I think I've read that pee can be used. We talked about one tannery in the UK that uses fish oil.
Yep, that's JFJ Baker's. Yep.
Lots of different ways to tan, but basically you're trying to preserve that skin so that you can use it, so that you can keep it somewhat supple, keep it from smelling, keep it in a condition where it would want to be used.
Yep. And continually reused.
Same question, like basically what is skin. I also had written down what is hide. Again, I mean, these things we just covered, but not everything is a skin and not everything is a hide. So you end up in situations where you're wondering, like shell. Shell isn't really skin. Shell isn't really the hide of the animal. It's something that lies beneath. What are scales?
Scales are
snake.
Yep. Yep. So in alligator's case, it's mostly cartilage, and it is hardened pieces of cartilage that have flexible points that run between them. So when we talk about like tanning alligator, for example, you're really not necessarily tanning the scales. The scales themselves don't rot in a particular way. You're actually tanning the different layers that run in between them that allow the scales to flex, which is what allows a like crocodile skin boot to actually move and not, break apart on itself, because the scales themselves don't flex, obviously. And then in terms of like snake skin and whatnot, snake skin operates a lot like a suede does, where a lot of times it has a backer that maintains its strength and keeps it from, obviously separating into pieces. Because, if you flexed a snake skin, then a snake is shedded. Obviously, the second it gets even remotely dry, it just breaks into pieces. So it's preserved, moistened, conditioned, and it has a backer associated with it the same way like suede would to, let it maintain its form. Now that one, those reptile tanned ones are a little bit of a process, right? They go through way more. They need special conditioning and care, and obviously they're not meant to be worn every single day, right? And just like them, like they're not really considered a skin per se. When we talk about skin when it comes to leather, we're talking specifically hides that have been all the hair removed, plucked, shaved, whichever it is, whether it's like ostrich, kangaroo, doesn't matter. It's been plucked, shaved, brought down to the skin layer. A lot of times there's been extra work done to it, especially on the flesh side or the suede cut side. Most horse has a ton of its textury, fuzzy side taken off, where something like bison is generally just burnished flat. But usually when we talk about skin in terms of tanning, it is a pre-prepped skin, not a freshly, skinned.
What other animals can offer shell other than horse?
Mule. And specifically because mule comes from a combination of donkey and horse, because mules can't breed with other mules. They breed with horses.
An honorable mention to the kangaroo.
Yeah, kangaroo is an interesting one. Kangaroo, it doesn't have sweat glands. So since kangaroos don't have sweat glands, when they're shaven down, they have a cross-section that is very distinct with shell cordovan. It has a similar thickness, consistency, flexibility, and density.
What is full grain leather?
So full grain leather is oftentimes misconstrued with top grain leather. Full grain mean it contains the top grain, the middle epidermis layer, and all the suede cuts. Meaning start to finish, short of some finishing done to the suede area, it contains the full stack of grain. Whereas top grain leather is what is left when it's split in the epidermis layer to have suede cuts and top grain. So dress shoes are usually a combination of top grain leather or suede. Very rarely is like a dress shoe a full grain leather. Full grain leathers are more common to be things like work boots, because oftentimes they're between the 5 and 7 ounce range, which is too thick for dress shoes in either capacity.
These are situations where a lot of people get confused, and when somebody will say something is made out of leather, something is made out of full grain, something's made out of top grain. These are all terms that I feel like a lot of places will play with when they're trying to give you a lower quality. It's leather.
Yeah, the people's confusion isn't really so much like a misinformation or like a lack of understanding. It's more so how the market wanketeering terms have just gone overboard. People use them. I don't even think it's just with like lower quality stuff. A lot of people just use them to make people think it's better or worse in particular situations. Like realistically, the difference between a top grain and a full grain when it comes to dress shoes is nothing. There's no benefit to having full grain in dress shoes over top grain. You're getting all the best parts, especially for what the dress shoe is. But because, people see it differently, a lot of times your salesman or your just, marketing material will interchangeably use those terms to help people feel better about their purchase. Even though realistically, when it comes to dress shoes, you're getting nothing different out of it. Like from a comfort's perspective of dress shoes, really the top grain's better than the full grain. But that also comes back to something we've preached heavily throughout all of this is you should be making choices on your footwear based on the specific circumstances and the conditions you need of them, not like what is the most highest top quality, coolest, most badass thing that existed. Otherwise, we'd use exclusively Shinky, horse rump, and shell cordovan for everything. And let me tell you, that's not a world we want to be in.
What is corrected leather?
Corrected leather is something that's actually done more often than people think. Lots of high quality leathers are corrected. Corrected means once they have taken all of the fur and everything that's on the portion of the top grain, the highest portion of the leather, and they correct out bug bites, scratches, marks. It's just a very light sanding and correcting process to make the piece look very uniform. When we talk about like high-end fashion brands, fast fashion, shit like Hermes or Gucci or stuff, you're buying a $70 product for $3,000 because of the name. They are using something called a patent leather so that the whole purse looks perfectly identical throughout it. Corrected grain is the process of trying to do that with aniline dyeing in a more natural process where you're just trying to make the hide look fairly uniform across all of it. That's really all it's doing. And lots of high-end leathers are corrected grain. Chrome XL's corrected grain. Wicket and Craig does a decent bit of corrective grain, especially in English Brinell and harness. It's just making the hide look more uniform. And it's roughly a sanding / cutting process that does it. And it's just to take out inconsistencies. Or a lot of times to make the dye take a little bit more evenly.
While everything you said is true, not all of that gets considered by the general public to be corrected leather.
Correct. The general term corrected leather is heavily corrected, which is like your patent leathers or like a nubuck.
Like Doc Martens will be a popular example of a very corrected leather. It can almost look a little plasticky on top. What is vegan leather?
Vegan leather is leather that is made from a synthetic material that doesn't come from an animal and is actually worse for the environment than regular leather is. Not only does it break down quicker, it creates way more pollutants in the process of making it than regular leather does by a long shot. And it doesn't biodegrade on top of it. Leather does.
Indeed. I often laugh because the way that they've chosen to market it is towards these people that are vegans, towards people that are worried about the environment. They don't want to kill the cute little animals, the cute little cows. And, it's funny because leather exists anyway, so they didn't kill anything just for it. And the plastic that the vegan leather actually is actually worse for the environment. And they're too stupid to fucking know it.
Yep. The worst part is the backer that's used in it, which is that kind of microfiber suede, like almost looks like a microfiber towel material. What they use for that so that it holds with glue is the most damaging part of that, and the creation of that is extremely toxic. So
we used to call this pleather.
Yeah. Yep. Good old
what kind of seats
couch.
You got in that car? I got pleather seats in that car.
Pleather couch that after 6 years you can't sit on anymore, needs a couch cover. So
there ought to be a law that vegan leather has to be called pleather, and people might actually understand what they're actually buying.
Yep. For those that are uninformed with their comment, nobody kills animals for leather. Like, no one kills an ostrich or a kangaroo for leather. I wish people would kill kangaroos for leather. They're extremely invasive and a massive problem in Australia. And it's actually a shame that there is laws in the U.S. that do not allow American tanneries to tan kangaroo leather. They can bring in kangaroo leather that has been tanned, but it is illegal for Horween to go buy kangaroo hides to tan. They're not allowed to do it, which is a crime. But 0 animals are killed exclusively for their leather. Overwhelming majority, including caiman, crocodile, and some of the really exotic stuff, is killed for meat and is then used for leather. The tanning industry uses somewhere reportedly between 25% and 40% of the hides harvested for meat, and the rest are disposed of. So over 60% of all the cows that are used exclusively for meat, their hides are disposed of. They don't even become leather. And that's just because, one, there's not enough demand for it, and number 2, tanning agents are expensive enough that it would be impossible to tan all of that as leather.
Being mad at the meat industry is a good, valid thing if you're into it and you want to worry about it. But if you're that type of person, you probably should be in favor of the use of leather, because the animal, unfortunately, that was killed actually gets used
Yep. And it's
instead
super
of just
biodegradable.
thrown into a landfill.
Yeah, especially if we're talking like vegetable tanning, the level of biodegradable, you stick that in the ground, it'll be gone in 3 years. Chrome tanned, maybe not as much because of the chromium salts, but it definitely won't last no 10 years.
What is a vamp?
The vamp is a particular part of the boot. And of course, I have 2 monkey boots sitting here to make this more complicated. You know what? Nope, that's a mock toe. God, I have the wrong stuff. You know what? I'm just gonna grab the mock toe. It'll be easier.
I grab something?
Nah, yeah, I got it right here. I have all lace to toes or lace to toe style models here at the moment. I've got the Tahuras, I've got monkey boot, and 2 other monkey boots. So the vamp is this portion of the boot right here. It's the boot that goes from the uppers right here to the toe. Sometimes it can have like a mock toe like this. Sometimes it can have a toe cap. There's a couple different things, but it's this particular piece. The vamp is unique in its name, and the reason it's called out separately than something like the uppers is called the uppers that don't have parts is in almost all footwear I've ever seen, the vamp is lined. Not all footwear is lined, but the vamp will almost always exclusively be lined. Now, like I said, there could be a toe cap here.
It's lined with the same thing.
Yep. It could be a toe cap here. You could have like dress shoes. You could have a medallion punched in. It could be blucher, a long wing. It could have broguing. But this portion right here is the vamp. It's where the instep of your foot to your toes goes, essentially. The upper always connects with the vamp in some way.
And you can't see it because of his kilty, but the vamp does go up into the toe area a little. How much it goes up depends on the model.
Yep. Maker too. Some of them go far, some of them don't go as far. Like the lace to toe models, like what I was going to grab and decided to sit down, they go up a little bit farther. Lace to toe will go to about right here. That's just due to the nature of lace to toe and how the different panels overline. So the reason this was such a bad example is the only part of it that's the vamp of this one is literally the toe right here, because the vamp is covered by the lineman patch here and the upper here. Since it's a lace to toe, the uppers go all the way to right here. So this is technically the only part of the vamp. There is more vamp. It is just covered. So,
what is a counter?
All right, so
I guess at the same time we should answer, what is a counter cover?
Yep. So the counter is this portion in the heel right here. So inside of here, you're going to see you don't see anything, and you don't see it on the outside. So in between the upper and the counter cover, this is an external counter cover. So this is important because there is internal counters. There is between the upper piece right here and this counter cover, which is a one-piece counter cover, which is a good example for this. There is a very hard piece of leather that'll be anywhere from 10 to 14 ounces that is skived. It has some pieces hollowed. It has notches cut for it to bend that the maker will shape into what protects and holds his heel shape. It's the heel structure. Good counters will be leather. There are going to be ones that will be like something like styrene or Celastic or some other heat-based thermoplastic. That goes here, and even like your regular tennis shoes actually does have a heel counter in it. They just break. That's the little plastic thing that pokes you in the back of the foot after you've stepped in it enough times, and that just maintains the shape of the heel, and it also makes sure that the boot, shoe, or whatever holds your foot in place and is locked in by it. This one happens to be leather, and it's a single piece, so like this right here, there's nothing here. And just like your regular ones that have a secondary piece here for the secondary backstay that the heel counter cover goes over, there's nothing there. It's just stiffer. But it's just this piece right here. It starts here, it ends here, and it's just a nice stiff piece that maintains the shape of it. This is an external heel counter. There's something called an internal heel counter where on the inside, it'll be between the uppers and an internal heel counter cover where you'll have just a single piece on the back that covers your backstay stitch. And that puts the counter internally, which does give you extra layers of leather to protect it. Now, doesn't help you at all. Work boots will be external heel counter covers, and they'll be external heel counters. Only dress shoes traditionally have an internal heel counter cover, or set up in such a way that you can't see it from the inside. And that's why. So you have a more uniform looking backside. That's the reason.
Work boot usually won't be a one piece either. It makes it harder to rebuild the boot.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are offering it as an option now, so you can do it on a 6-inch boot. You will not do a single piece like this on anything bigger than 6 inches. This is more common with like a 4, 5, and 6-inch boot. It's traditional. The Iron Ranger has something like this. That's why a lot of people like it. Because traditionally speaking, they would do this. But yeah, not a. It makes the backstay more flexible. That's it. That's all it does. From a functionality perspective, it's just more flexible. So if you bend down a lot, this might be a good choice for you.
What is a gusset and how does it differ from a tongue?
All right. So a fully gusseted tongue looks like this. The tongue is solid all the way through up to the top. It is one piece all the way to where it connects right here in the crown. This doesn't allow water to go in. It also means it's got to be bigger and allows trifolding. That is a fully gusseted tongue. Now there's two other types of tongues, as I try not to run the dog over with my chair here. One of them is a partially gusseted tongue, which is this guy right here, where there is a tongue and it is gusseted only up to a certain point. So in this tongue's case, it is gusseted up into this eyelet. And from here, it is connected. And it allows some movement in the tongue, but not a whole lot of movement in the tongue. This lets it shift a little bit left and right based on your particular wearing perspective. A non-gusseted tongue is one that would be just connected right here, and it flaps and dangles in the breeze. More like a dress shoe. Some boot brands do that.
Gusset is where it connects to the upper.
Yep. Well, in that's a good distinction. In a pure definition form, a non-gusseted tongue connects only to the Vamp. Any kind of gusseted one will connect at least somewhat to the upper. Every now and then you'll see brands like Allen Edmonds who will use a couple stitches that secure one side of the tongue to one side of the upper so that it can't move as much. And that'll be the extent of the gusseting. It's not really gusseting, but it's faking gusseting. And gusseting is just really a matter of waterproofness and letting like dust, dirt, debris, shit like that in your boots.
What is a side?
Side
as far as buying leather.
Yep. So side is going to be a term related into purchasing leather. So a cow obviously is one piece. So when they would take like a cow or a horse, they split it across the bottom and they lay it out into what's known as a bend. From the above view, that is both sides of the cow that look like they've been smashed flat, like some kind of alien experiment or UFO shit, right? A side is where they split that bend directly down the middle and creates two sides, each side of the cow. The reason they use the word side is from an above view, it looks like a side. It looks like, oh, this is side A of the cow, it's the side B of the cow, or side left and side right, so on and so forth. And that's split down the middle. So when it's tanned as one large piece. Very rarely do they split them into sides beforehand. They're tanned as a bend. You can also buy bends. And that's what the side is. It's important because when something becomes a side, there's something it can't be anymore. When we talk about double horse front, double shoulder, double rump, or horse rump, those are all done in bend form, where they are stamped out before it's split down the middle. Once it's been split down the middle, you can no longer have double shoulder. You can no longer have horse rump. You can no longer have double horse front or any of those things. It's also hard to have a strip. A lot of the horse strip is that spine section that's split. So these things don't exist anymore because the strip, actually one strip runs down the spine, the other strip runs across the top of the horse rump that's just before the cordovan. So like literally by cutting it down, not like you not have horse rump, which eliminates some of the strip, you can't have any of the spine section either, which eliminates that portion as well. Oh, am I getting a little
Heard
bit
a noise? Are we still there?
Yep, no, we're here. I've been talking.
Somebody.
Yeah, we looks like I had a little bit of internet blip. We're good. They got me chatting away.
You answered a few questions at once. I was going to follow that up with what is double shoulder, what is double rump, and what is a bend. So you covered it all. I mean, you know, if you're looking at the side of the animal, you're looking at a side. You looked at it from the top, you'd be able to see a bend.
Yep.
And if it's a double shoulder, it means that it's got both front shoulders.
Yep.
Double rump, it's got both rumps or both hind legs, if you wanted to view it that way. But it'd just be splitting the animal instead of at the top, be splitting the animal at its sides.
Yep.
Said the same thing he said, but maybe in a different way. Maybe it was better reinforced or better understood or not as much. Finish types.
Oh boy,
Like
there's
TPR, for example.
there's a lot of these. So when we talk about finish types, we're talking about how they're finishing the cow or the horse or the whatever leather. Generally speaking, most of these are going to apply to cow. A couple are going to apply to horse. But first, let's talk about dyeing methods. So there's three major dyeing methods that you're going to hear about from a general perspective. You're going to hear about what's known as T-core, which is just the surface layer. That's like what Chrome XL is. T-core commonly, well, nowadays it's known as T-core, but it'd be known as pigment finish back in the day. It's where you would spray a pigment layer that's like paint going over the top that has no penetration. That would be your T-core. Next, you have what's called aniline, which would deal with specifically struck through, which is the dye has penetrated from the top through the core all the way to the back. Now, aniline finishes can be done just top layer and grain layer. You can finish both. A good example, that's Chrome XL. Chrome XL is not a pigment finish, it's an aniline finish, but it's not allowed to penetrate all the way into the core. And you can order Chrome XL finished on both sides, so that it is, color number 8 on the outside and color number 8 on the inside, and it'll have a internal brown/blue core, depending on how much you do to it. A lot of times blue core leather is considered lower quality, but the more blue you try to get out of it from the chromium salts, the more you damage the fibers by essentially making them weaker and more flexible.
Could you order CXL with one exterior color and a different interior color?
I'm sure it's possible. I don't know if anybody's done it, but yeah, I'm sure you probably could. You can order the inside finished. I mean, obviously,
Never thought about that before.
It adds a lot of price, obviously. It's usually around like $4 a square foot, I think, to finish the rough outside.
TPR?
TPR, thermoplastic resin. It is a finish that's meant to replicate jack glazing of shell cordovan. Often used on horse rump. It can be used on cow. I don't know if anybody does. You could do it. It's there. TPR is often used with crust finishes. So I didn't talk about this one, but there's a type of leather called crust finished leather, where it is the stage before it gets dyed, where it's ready to take dyes. A lot of times, like really natural or white leathers are done in a crust leather format, and then get something like TPR or other forms of jack glazing over the top of them to maintain that kind of pure color, right? Because obviously it's leather. It's going to have some inclinations, especially in vegetable tan, to be a lighter brown color, which is why very light black dyes over brown dye tend to create green. So it's a lot of gray leathers with a little bit of wear tend to move more towards like a green color, and that is because that light brown inclination is in there. Now, obviously, with chrome tanned leathers, which let you get a little bit more vibrant colors and away from earthy tones, that's going to be more of a blue core, where they can bleach all the way white if they have to. And TPR, like I said, is this thermoplastic resin. It's just replicating jack glazing from shell cordovan. In the same tone, that crust leathers also how they do distress leathers. So distress leathers, what they do is they rough up the crust layer of it, and then they dye it and rough it up some more to give you that deep, like when you see like Seidel's distressed or like Red Dog, that's what it is they've distressed it at two different points in the process so that the distressing exists all the way through, and it's not just done to the top layer and look like a patina finish.
I'll expand on the T-core. T-core, essentially means another color that can come through with wear, with damage. T-core can be because it wasn't struck through and you're getting the color that was underneath, which is probably natural. So it'll be a shade of brown. But T-core could also mean that a special finish was put on top of a colored leather. And you could have you could have had a green leather, and somebody could have covered it up with black, so that your T-core effect would be green showing through.
Yep. This is common in older boots. So they sometimes are called ghost leathers. Like Shinky's done this a couple times. So has Walper. But Gabbard from Creosote, the majority of his boots are that style of T-core leather, which sometimes is also called overdyed, where he has his 9 ditches, which is a red boot overdyed completely black. As you wear it, the red shows through. It's the same with his fiction model. It has a rust undertone that black shows through. He has his morph, which is the same thing with green, and he's done his Parlor Ska spray, which is got 5 different choices of base color, and then he does a black overdye in either aniline or pigment, whichever one you want, that covers that up the same way they used to, spray in the 50s. Motorcycle gangs would spray their brown World War II jackets black with car paint. That's what the Parlor Scott spray is. It's replicating that exact process, and that's exactly it. T-coring is sometimes called overdying, and that's essentially what it is you're overdying a previous color, whether it's done at the tannery or by yourself, with another color to reveal at a later date. Sometimes people call that rub-off leathers. Not quite the same thing. That's like a wax finish over the top of it, but it's a similar idea.
I was about to mention rub-off. Rub-off would be a wax over top, and sometimes people will purposely scuff some of that wax away to begin with and then watch it grow. And of course, you can always apply wax back over it and start all over again. I think the only place I've really seen that popular is Doc Martens. The punks used to do it on their own because Doc Martens didn't offer it. And then when Doc Marten realized that their fans loved it so much, started offering it for sale that way.
Yep.
Similar. Very similar to the T-core.
Yep.
Which should not be confused with pull-up.
Yes.
Although some do. And I just watched a video this week, just today, where somebody who should have known better referred to the two as the same.
Yep. Now, T-coring does help with pull-up. You do get more striking pull-ups with T-core leathers, but that does not mean it's required. A great example of that is Badalassi Carlos. Some of their lineup have incredible pull-up that is all completely struck through leathers. But it definitely makes your pull-up much more striking if it is a T-core leather. But they're not the same thing. You can have all kinds of pull-ups. Pull-ups are more about the emulsification of waxes and oils in the process, more so than like the state of how the dye was applied to the leather.
You covered crust on your own. So, pebble grain.
Pebble grain. So there's 2 ways to get a pebble grain leather. One is it could be embossed into the surface. But much more likely than that, most pebble grains mean that they're a tumbled leather. And a tumbled leather is just a leather that stays in the tumbling bin longer to get softer. And in the process of getting softer, damages the leather more to make the pebbles. The pebbles are actually technically damage to the hide. But it makes it super soft and pliable. It's generally common in dress shoes and casual footwear. Nobody uses pebble grained leather for work. On that same note, Scotch grain is a similar process. It's very much the same thing. Scotch grain can be done one of 2 ways. It could be done with a hot iron that's debossing the pattern in. It could also be done with scratches. Some cordovan is actually done with a scratching machine to pull off, just because shell cordovan's fibers, right? So you can do Scotch grain both ways. Scotch grain super popular in high-end dress shoes. Never seen a work boot made out of it. I haven't even seen a casual boot made out of it, for that fact.
Scotch grain was going to be my next question. And yes, Scotch grain is more often than not, it is a pattern that is stamped in to either a lower quality leather or just a leather that had a lot of imperfections in it. So that, and it happens to be a really cool look.
Yep.
It's kind of unfortunate because I love the way Scotch grain looks. And if I were buying a cheaper piece of footwear, I would go for Scotch grain in a heartbeat. But buying higher end boots, I realized that they were covering up for a leather that did not appear the way that it should have. Seems kind of a shame to use Scotch grain.
It is. Unfortunately, they do it with shell cordovan. Scotch grain shell cordovan is very popular. It unfortunately makes it look like a cheaper boot, but Scotch grain shell cordovan is very popular. Japanese fucking love it.
Loose grain. What's the definition of loose grain?
So loose grain is not what someone would expect it to be. Loose grain is basically the absence of tight grain. It creates lots of ripples and waves and wrinkles in an unworn pair of footwear. It also tends to be soft and easily malleable. We see it as, unfortunately, this pair won the Chrome XL lottery, so there's not a lot of loose grain in this one. I wish I had a pair that did. You can see a little bit of loose grain right here where this extra wrinkling is coming in deep where nothing else is wrinkling. Problem with loose grain is oftentimes you don't see it in a brand new pair of boots. It has to be particularly bad to see it in a new pair of boots. You will tend to find loose grain after the break-in process. That's why things are known as like the Chrome XL lottery, for example. I do have one pair of Dublin that came with particularly loose grain from Nick's that wasn't great, but honestly, I can't even use an example now because after you wore it, you can't see it. Dublin creates a lot of those effects naturally in that kind of rustic look that people like. But when I first got it, the left boot had a ton of loose grain on it. But once again, since it's Dublin, I didn't care enough to bother with it. Now, when it comes to Chrome XL, loose grain and Chrome XL, if it is visible from the day you get it, send it back because it should not be. Chrome XL will already show tendencies of that naturally. It's a consequence of the air drying process. But once again, loose grain, we tend to poke at Horween a lot with loose grain. I think it's just because the amount of Chrome XL that's used, because everybody uses Chrome XL for something. Wicket and Craig is also particularly known for having to deal with loose grain. And really, probably about every tannery fights with it. It's just a commonality of anything that's getting close to the skirt or the belly tends to have lots of loose grain. Loose grain is very indicative of fat lines. They tend to go hand in hand. Any super flexible parts.
And as he said, but to make it more to the point, that can be seen at different points, depending. I mean, sometimes you see it on that side when it's laying on the table. Sometimes you don't see it until it's been lasted. Sometimes you don't see it until it's gotten all broken in, and sometimes you don't see it till years later. I mean, it depends on when it comes through as to how it comes through and when it comes through.
Yep. Loose grain's not necessarily a bad thing per se, except for in your work boots. Work boots is where you really don't want to see loose grain. And it's quite simply because while the risk isn't high, it is a much easier penetration and abrasion point. There's just less density behind it.
But with other footwear, you don't want it because it doesn't look as good.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to see loose grain in dress shoes, which is why dress shoes a lot of times have heavily corrected grain leathers in them. That's why Doc Martens uses it. Now, corrected grain leathers, one of the reasons they're doing a lot of that like patent where there's almost a plastic layer on top of it is to hide stuff like loose grain. Oftentimes, it's funny too because the Full Grain podcast talked about this a little bit, and they very lightly hinted at this, and I'm just going to punch it straight in the nose. Most of your loose grain problems are not a result of the tannery and the leather used. The result of the boot maker not making good, accurate clicks and bad clicking.
assuming they saw it.
Correct.
Sometimes you don't see it till later.
Yep. And like that's a downside of air drying, which is a process that's going to involve shrinking.
How about a grainy leather?
A grainy leather is one where the loose grains are particularly visible before you last them. So we talk about a leather that's got a lot of graininess, or what we call a C grade leather. That is one where when they go to click it, they can see the loose grain visible. Technically, it's a C grade hide. Lots of imperfections, bug bites, loose grain, holes, so on and so forth.
What does shrunken hide mean? Shrunken leather.
Means it's gone through one of two processes to shrink it. A process that's intentionally done to shrink it, like Law Tanning's bison, or other shrunken cowhides, like Consaria Walper's Dollaro. Buttero is their smooth one. Dollaro is their shrunken one. Or processes where they go through air drying, which is what you see with honeycombing and horse. It's what you see with Chrome XL, Dublin. Those are all air dried hides. It means they're hung and allowed to air dry. Anything that's air dried is going to have a certain amount of shrinkage. It also means it's going to have something called springback. But there are purposefully shrunken processes like shrunken cow, Dollaro, or shrunken bison, Law Tanning.
And to be more to the point, since you mentioned it, honeycomb. What does it mean if a leather is said to be honeycombed?
Honeycombed is two parts. It means it's going to have kind of like squares running through it, or it looks like a honeycomb in its surface where you can't run your fingers over and feel it per se like it's been pressed. It's just naturally there. And honeycombing comes from two parts of the process. We usually in honeycombing we refer to it in horse leather specifically. You don't really see this as much in cow. And that is, it has been air dried. And not only has it not been air dried, they don't run it backwards through the hot iron. So when leather is made to sit flat before they hang it, they run it through something called a hot iron to make it want to sit flat and not curl back up on itself. Horsehide, especially Merriam, is known for what they call wrinkles and not quite as much honeycombing. And those wrinkles are because they don't run it backwards through the hot iron. They run it through one direction and they stop. Honeycombing is that same thing where they won't run it through backwards, but you get those honeycombing shrinking features in the air drying. And that's generally known for shinky. Now, Merriam does air dry theirs. And some Merriam hides do get that honeycombing. But it's much more seen as like a wrinkle. And that's just because it's not ran backwards through the hot iron. It's only ran through one direction.
Somebody said that a leather was buttery.
Sorry, to finish answering that. Sometimes honeycombing or like wrinkles look like wood grain. They're wavy. Same thing. Buttery leather. Buttery is going to be something like Chrome XL. Anything that's buttery sometimes is referred to a term as cooked. That is the emulsification of waxes, oils, and liquids into the leather that make it super soft. It also means it gets something called blooming, where if it sits for long enough, you see like white conditioners build up on the surface. That is a buttery leather. Anything that is oil tanned and goes through that emulsification process would be considered buttery. A good example of that is like Red Wing's Copper Rupp and Tuff from SB Foot. That's an oil tanned leather. That's a buttery leather. But generally speaking, they're referring to Chrome XL. And that's because, or in the case of Wicket and Craig, their oiled Latigo, which is kind of their Chrome XL copy of full veg tan. And that is just something that is oil tanned to the extreme, and it's emulsified and just totally saturated in fats, liquids, and oils and conditioners. This is natural Chrome XL here. It is what we'd consider very buttery. Now, this one happens to be a thick one. For whatever reason, they got some 7.5 ounce Chrome XL. As you can see, it is very... that looks quite as good there. There you can see it. There you can see it's very thick Chrome XL. So this one's not as buttery feeling usually, but the buttery feel is that like right around 6 ounce. Heavy oils, heavy conditioners. And it goes through a process called emulsification, which uses heat and whatnot. So an emulsified wax or oil is solid at room temperature, so it means it's got to apply it hot. That's part of that hot iron I talked about earlier. For it to be emulsified, it's got to be solid at room temperature. So it doesn't feel wet to the touch, but it definitely feels buttery and velvety.
Ban on wrinkles. What does it mean if there's wrinkles in a leather?
So, short of loose grain, the other thing that could cause wrinkles in a leather is actual folding or movement. So as you wear, as you can see in this tongue here, you see these kind of ripples that go through it. These will eventually become wrinkles and creases. And those are just areas where the leather flexes a bunch and cavities are created from the leather needing to move from one place to another to allow flexing. So flexing will either cause a roll, which means the leather has gone from flat to a roll so that it can constrict easier, or it creases. Those creases will lead to other things like wrinkles. Now, the reason you see like loose grain, especially around the belly area, is because that's where the animal flexed and moved a lot. Therefore, it created its own loose grain / wrinkles to easily be able to move.
The wrinkles that sometimes we'll see in boots, where where it's a stitch down, where it's folded back outward.
Ah, grab one that I can see easier. Nope, not that one. There we go. It's not the greatest, but so you'll see around this edge these kind of like wrinkles that exist. That this one's not even a great example either.
Oh, never mind. Start over. You were disconnected for.
Oh,
10 seconds.
They could still hear me. But so if you look right here, you'll see these wrinkles that are around the edge right here. I don't have many great examples here because all of these haven't left it here. But that wrinkle is caused by the folding of the leather, and sometimes you'll see like a divot, or I want to call it a scar. But in the previous episode, you would have seen it a lot in the picture that I had up, which I'm going to go ahead and bring up on screen real quick again, where that horsehide showed it very, very, very well. And that wrinkle is caused by two things. You'll see it right here on my screen real well. It's real deep in this area. And that is, one, a thick leather bending across itself. But number two, they use something called a 5-in-1 machine in the stitch down to push down where they press the edge down. And that 5-in-1 machine has a curved piece that goes in and pushes it down. Sometimes they get it a little too close to the leather and it'll create a small gouge or a little bend in the leather where you see like a dent. And that's just the 5-in-1 machine pressing that down. That is caused by the leather needing to flatten out with no skiving. So you can skive that outside piece to stop that wrinkling some, but that obviously is going to reduce the life of the uppers in terms of like resoling it, right? So it's like a fine line of when you want to skive and don't skive. But most of those dents or creases or lines are caused by harder, stiffer temper veg tans and being pressed up against by the 5-in-1 machine.
That's an example where you might look at it and think that it's a negative, but it's actually not. And I've seen people talk about various boots with regards to that for work boots, and they'll see the wrinkle there and they'll point at it like it's bad or like it's a negative, and it's actually a sign of a stiffer temper, probably better piece of leather.
Yep. It's usually thicker too. The thicker it is, the more likely it is to happen, just because the leather needs to go somewhere as it bends, especially on that sharp angle.
I think it's a good place to stop. 48 minutes, nowhere near done. We can save the rest for another Q&A.
Cool. How many more do we have left?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 10.
I think we can finish
Really?
it because I've covered a couple of these. Like I've covered some. Yeah, we'll keep going here. What's the next one? Quills?
Draw.
Draw.
The leather draws up or bunches up.
Yeah. Okay, so that's once again that's a result of temper and moving. So when you get leather draw, especially like in the toe spring where you get like lots of bumps across the toe, that is where the leather has rolled over itself and started forming so that when you walk, the leather has somewhere to go. In the beginning of break-in, you'll see that as like kind of feel that as like pushing down on your toes, and that's the leather drawing together. Obviously, as it breaks in and it's softened, it won't push down on your feet and your toes near as hard, but that's the leather needing somewhere to go as it's flexing. And obviously, it's going to be way more prevalent if you have something like a toe cap because there's less places for the leather to draw to, and it's going to make it more intense in one or two particular areas.
Quills. Can you define what a quill is? When we notice it, when we see it?
Yep, quills are going to be on anything that is from a feathered animal. It's most likely in what's known as quilled ostrich, and that's where the plumes of feathers come out. So in an ostrich, their feathers actually are kind of weird compared to birds, where they're in one spot, 10 or 15 feathers will fall out. So like the butt of the ostrich looks completely covered in feathers, the reality is it's actually not as many spots. Though every one of those quills had 10 to 20 feathers coming out of it, and it's spread out across the entire hide. You can do ostrich where you leave the quills and you don't correct it out, or the quills can be completely corrected out. Obviously, ostrich being kind of a rare and expensive leather, the quills are desirable. And they do reduce the durability of the leather a little bit. Like the quills aren't particularly hard. They are easy to kind of split and break the top of the quill off. And they can cause splits from them. But ostrich, surprisingly, is super durable. Like, there's a reason cowboy boots people do work in ostrich. The issue's the price. It's a very soft, slippery leather. It's very tough. It's also very expensive. Ostrich hides, run $300 to $600 for nice ones, especially like quality bespoke ones, and they don't make very many boots. A nice $600 like bespoke cowboy boot, ostrich hide will probably make 2 pairs of boots, and one will be considered prime, and the other will probably be considered a seconds.
There's also 2 types of boots with regards to talking about ostrich specifically. There is full quill,
Yep.
and then there's smooth that they get from the area that there weren't any quills, where there weren't any feathers. The full quill is the one that grabs the most amount of money. The other type is, I mean, it's still soft, it's still tough, but it looks kind of like a regular leather. So
Looks like elephant skin.
I mean,
Very common. They also usually separate the shin and do it separately because ostrich shin makes great wallets. And it surprisingly can be bleached real well, so it takes tons of beautiful colors. And even metallic dyes. Another unique thing about ostrich is it takes metallic dyes. They can do it in metallic colors. And not like a leafing, like it actually does impregnate into the skin somewhat. It's kind of neat.
genuine leather. How would you define genuine leather? Yes, this should have been much higher on the list earlier in the conversation.
So genuine leather is an actual leather tan product that has no synthetics, and they're not adding anything extra to it to maintain it. So like with some of your super cheap Indian chrome tan leathers, they have like the rubber shit that they put into it to help it. It's like an emulsified product. Like what's that one that fucking Roseanne likes to shit on all the time? It's the one that comes out in the rubber sheets. I'm blanking on the name. They use it in like heel stacks and shit a lot. It's not the fiberboard. It's the fucking rubber version of it. Alden uses it with their fucking heel stacks. Oh god, what's the name of that shit? I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, it's like fiberboard, but it's got rubber mixed into it, and it becomes it's a product that's essentially a complete like it's made with leather fibers and chunks, but it may be fiberboard, so I'm thinking of, and I'm just being an idiot today.
Leatherboard?
Leatherboard, there you go. That's what it is. Leatherboard. But yeah, it's literally fibers and all the scraps and ground up cuttings of everything that's not used that is turned into a product. The same where they take a really cheap chrome tan and it's backed by something like fucking shitty Nike suede sneakers aren't considered genuine leather. Genuine leather is a leather product start to finish. It's made from the same cow and not multiple pieces put together. Because that does happen too.
With the leather board, you were describing bonded leather.
There you go.
You moved
Bonded leather.
into a
That's
different
it.
area than genuine leather.
Yep.
Genuine leather would be a low quality piece of leather that does not qualify for any of the better terms like top grain or full grain, for example, but they still want to convince the customer that it's a good quality leather product, even though it's not a good quality leather product. It's a low quality leather product, and genuine leather is what they like to call it.
Yeah, it's they're the chrome tanning capital of the world is in India. Like literally, their streets and buildings and clothes and rivers like run with the dye and the nasty shit that they use in this. It's just enough free of synthetics to technically be leather, essentially.
What are scars?
Scars.
Why do we get them? When do we get them?
Yep. So bug bites, barbed wire, animal attacks. Scars are just imperfections in the hide that are caused by an external force. Most likely bug bites or barbed wire, 9 times out of 10 these days, that just leave an imperfection in the hide. A lot of times in aniline dyed stuff, they leave them in on purpose because it adds character. Some of the bit of honeycombing you see and stuff can be from damage. A lot of times in horse hides, they will try to pass a horsehide off as like, oh, this is part of the tanning process and it's natural. Whenever there's a non-absence of color, so like on the PNWU, there was some shinky John Lofgren shown recently that had scratches.
I was about to say, yeah, we just saw this 2 days ago or yesterday.
Yeah, that's literally done after the fact. If it exists on the hide before they start tanning, the dye will cover it. You will not see an absence of color from the scratching due to it. That was done well after the tanning process. And so they will exist. The biggest fear with bug bites is that it's on the toe and it gets stretched in the lasting process. The best story I was told about this is Gabbard in one of his original drifter boots missed a bug bite on the toe of the cap toe of one of his, and he only saw it after lasting, and he sent it to the customer to see what the customer thought of it, and the customer loved it and kept it. He said ever since then he is triple diligent about it because he's missed it once, and it does get huge and greatly exaggerated when it's stretched. So generally speaking, when you've ever seen a video of like a bespoke maker, like there's 2 Japanese brothers in Japan, Shinori Yusei, who make Ken Katoda is the one that posts on Instagram, make fucking beautiful footwear. But when you see him circling stuff in silver pen, Brian the bootmaker does this, you see that little weird, like the pen they use for marking in leather looks like an ink cartridge, like it would go inside of a pen. It's actually set up specifically on purpose. It's not just like a straight ink cartridge, but it looks like an ink cartridge for a pen, and you see them circle in silver. They're circling scars, bug bites, stuff like that. Sometimes you can, like in wallets, use them as like a centerpiece, but generally speaking, you try to avoid them as much as possible.
We talked in the previous video about the different, or was it earlier in this video? Can't remember, but we talked recently about the varying levels of corrected leather. Yeah, it was this it was this one, corrected leather. There are certainly very varying levels of corrected leather. So scars would be an area where somebody might correct it just enough to get rid of the scars, but yet the leather still doesn't have a uniform, smooth, plasticky surface.
Correct.
So you can have various levels of correction. And this conversation that we saw like yesterday in PNWU was a guy who posted up his John Lofgren's, and they looked pretty messed up. But somebody brought up a screenshot from the website for that boot where, I mean, there was a full description by Lofgren of, let's see, do I have it here? Did I take a screenshot of it?
What's allowed and what's not allowed.
I did. Let's see. Very minimal, if any surface correction is performed. This allows the authentic marks acquired by the horse during its life, such as those from bug bites or encounters with sharp tree branches, to remain subtly visible. These imperfections are not blemishes, but rather cherished enhancements, enriching the narrative of these exquisite hides. Which, some of that to me is, we got lower quality shit, and I don't want you to bitch about what you bought, so here's my disclaimer. But, that's not necessarily true. It depends on the situation. I mean, we do like to see some scarring in certain conditions. We do like to see some character. We do like to see T-core. We do like to see things that make it look less than uniform, to make it look more interesting. But there are limits to it, and how it's perceived and meant depends on the situation.
Yep, like no one wants the horse's branding in their fucking boots. Like, cut around it. They don't want the fucking brand. Like, no one cares. Just like whatever tag your cow had on the ear, they don't want that tanned too. Like, these are things you don't want. I mean, if a cow was attacked by a wolf and lived, yeah, we don't want the teeth marks. We don't want the obvious holes that are going to heal up very weird there. Cut around it. We talked about it a little bit with like kind of Chrome XL and kind of a bad rap it gets with the Chrome XL lottery, but a lot of times that's down on the boot maker or the item maker not doing good clicking and cutting around those defects. Not so much the result of like the tannery. This is kind of one of them. I mean, it does sound like a good disclaimer, and some of it's like Japanese idea of like they want their stuff to look like the way the animal lived. It's their, semblance of harmony in nature. But generally speaking, 9 times out of 10 Shinky hides I've seen are fucking exquisite. And the example that they showed on PNWU was very clearly done by the factory Lofgren uses to make it. It wasn't natural in the hide because there was an absence of color in the scratches. If the scratches were natural before the process started, they would be filled with dye.
Some of them, but the bug bite was earlier.
Yep.
An exception to that is kudu.
Yep.
People who buy kudu, they want the most scarring they can get. They want the most branches coming through in that hide as they can get. Yep. And I'm one of them. I've got a pair of kudu on the way. Yep. And I specifically asked them when they were making it to give me the highest quality parts as far as character. I wanted the absolute most fucked up bad spots in that hide.
Yeah, people want the kudu. They don't want the fucking kudu that had a nice life. They want the kudu that went to hell and back.
Bluing. What is bluing? Is it good? Is it bad?
There's nothing wrong with it. Bluing is just a result of chromium salts. Bluing or blue core. So some people have made comments. I'm not going to say who. Everyone probably knows who. It was Weston from Roseanville. About when you see blue core leather, that it's usually a bad thing. He meant that in regards to sneakers. And this is where context matters. If you learned nothing else today, context fucking matters. Bluing in white nasty shoe leather is a sign of cheap leather. It means it's white paint over the top of it. It wasn't dyed through. There was no work in the process whatsoever that went into making it a true white leather. Blue core and chrome tanning literally just means it was chrome tanned. Now, in the case of things like Chrome XL, the core is not going to stay blue. It's going to turn brown due to the veg tan process that happens later. But if it didn't go through that veg tan process, it wouldn't. A good example of this is you will see blue core a lot in bison leathers. Law tanning is struck through, but they don't have to strike it through. They can finish both sides in the same color. Blue tanning just means it was chrome tanned. And in the words of Nick Horween, It is not always a good thing to strike the blue core out and do struck through. By doing that and putting those dyes and those penetrants deep into it, you are weakening the internal core for sometimes not a lot of reason. Certain colors struck through is great benefit, others not so much. So just saying blue core versus struck through is always higher quality is not the case. The more you add to it, the weaker the leather is. Bluing is just a result of the chromium salts in the chrome tan process. Whether or not you strike through from that is a completely different process that is up to your tannery to make the best choices possible and choose the right hides for struck through that are not going to compromise their integrity at that point.
There are companies that have gotten so much pushback from people like Weston talking out of his ass that will go out of their way to make sure that they don't get that blue. And really, to do that, you're asking the tannery to basically bleach the hide all the way through. And as Mike just said, that's not good for the hide. So they're actually taking a step to degrade the hide in order to convince a certain customer base that it's a better hide.
Yep. And the worst part is it's all out of context. It's all out of context, too. Like, when he's talking about blue core leather, he's talking about sneakers. He's not talking about boot leather, right? Like, obviously, he's talking about leather that's always already the lowest of the low. And he's trying to simplify in his videos for a casual audience.
Well, he's also not the most knowledgeable. I hope. Yeah. I mean, he does become a little bit more knowledgeable as time goes on, and I don't know, maybe he actually is knowledgeable at this point. I gave up on giving that guy clicks a long time ago, but he just got into it knowing pretty much nothing and acting like he did, and he has said an awful lot of very wrong shit.
Yeah, and to like wrap that up into a basket for everybody at home, our business does not revolve around this. Like, obviously we have day jobs. No one's getting rich off of making Brothers in Boots. No one even cares about Brothers in Boots making money. We're doing this because we enjoy doing this. Nothing else. We're just two dudes sitting at home in their fucking basements making videos. In the case of, from a business perspective, like, obviously he is focusing on what is easy, digestible, gets the most views. Like, I have no doubt that Rose Anvil gets more views than fucking CNN does on a regular basis. That's a big point here, because for your videos to be super YouTube accepted, they either need tons of drama and hate, or they need lots of very casual, easily digestible, quick content that's more or less either helping people get over the hump of buying something or affirming a purchase they already have. They're there to look at a product that they've already seen. And after they've seen a couple, like, oh, I like this guy, I'll keep watching his stuff because he, made my Thursdays and my JKs look good or whatever, right? Because he's running a business. Keep in mind, like, what he shows there, he might know way more than what he's saying. He's just trying to dumb it down to an nth degree to make it visible. If you look at his original content, his original stuff had a lot more good information, and it was done as an experimental basis. He started cutting boots in half because it seemed cool, and, like, what are these guys hiding? This seems like a great idea. And then it evolved into what it is now, obviously. And it is what it is. Like, once again, for a casual context, that's whatever there. Obviously, he says a lot of things that are built with context in that he's not meaning as overarching statements, and people take as overarching statements. But Jeff is right. There's a lot of companies that are avoiding the blue core because he has an audience that has determined that because he said it about sneaker leather specifically and never mentioned it with boots, that now their boot leather can't have any of that blue core. Here we are. I mean, like I said, Bison's probably the biggest target on that too, hands down. Because it's one of the few boot leathers that's like completely chrome tanned besides calf. Most of your stuff like Chrome XL will generally never have the blue core just because of the veg retan process.
We mentioned this before, but just mention it directly. What is strike through or stricken through?
Yep. That's just where you allow your dyes, penetrants, and other agents to go from the top of the top grain of the full grain leather all the way to the flesh side or suede cut, top to bottom, which is different from like what Wicket and Craig generally does, where if, like, for example, say you get like their zucchini that's green on both sides, it has a finished T-core top and a finished T-core bottom, but has its brown core that still exists in the center. It's veg tan, so it's obviously not going to have a blue core.
First story. Another one we kind of mentioned, but to do it directly, what is pull-up?
Pull-up is when you pinch or squeeze the leather and the waxes and oils are moved around in such a way that you see a lighter or darker shade. Generally speaking, it's going to be lighter, very rarely going to be darker, but in pinching, twisting, moving, you see the pull-up come through. That is different from a T-core that has an actual dye or wax layer that has to be physically removed through the process of walking, scraping, so on and so forth. This is something that could be done with your hands, or what they call the snowball effect, where you grab a piece of leather, squeeze it like a snowball, let it go. Some people call it the crumple test.
It's the oil moving around in the leather.
Yep.
Moving to or fro. What do we got?
Temper.
We got two more.
Yep.
Temper.
Temper.
How would you define temper?
Stiffness, in one word. Temper is just how stiff a leather is and how much it wants to resist moving. Temper, obviously, so temper is usually gauged outside of thickness. They don't, like, something that is like a 6 out of 10 on the temper scale at 5 ounce is still considered 6 out of 10 at 7 ounce, even though the 7 ounce is obviously thicker or stiffer. It's the actual thickness that's adding the stiffness. Temper is usually measured on like what kind of firmness they're trying to get on it, regardless of the thickness. Obviously, thinner, even on a strong temper, is going to move more, and thicker is going to move less.
I believe this is a situation where I think we all might use it the reverse of what it's meant, like wiring.
Yeah.
Like the lower the number is actually the thicker wire. Because I believe a high temper is actually pretty fucking soft, and a low temper is really stiff.
Yeah, that's the thought process. So
I think technically,
yeah, so
I
temper.
don't use it that way, even though I know better.
Yeah, temper was really originally meant to describe a tumbled or a very soft leather, like a soft tempered leather, like very tumbled or beaten up. Temper was originally meant to describe something that's very soft. Obviously, nowadays we use it to describe thickness. But when I say stiffness, I don't mean as in very stiff or little stiff. It's really meant to be a sliding scale of stiffness, of not stiff at all to very stiff. But yes, temper originally, a very tempered leather originally is meant to be a very soft or tumbled leather. Thorogood was the one that really heavily used temper as a marketing term of their tempered leather as being very, soft and tumbled and rolled.
And the last one that I had written down for so far is suede. What is suede?
So suede is a technical term, but generally speaking, suede is the lower portion of the hide that is flesh to the epidermis layer that is a specific cut that's fuzzy on both sides. Sometimes suede is just meant to describe the fuzzy, which a full grain leather flipped out. Some people will call suede, which is not true. That's a rough out leather. Suede can have a lot of the suede cut, which is very thick, or a little of the suede cut. High quality suedes are strong enough that they don't need a backer and have some of the epidermis layer in them, which is getting to kind of the nubuck territory. In a suede, like I said, it's got to be fuzzy on both sides to be a true suede. It can have a backer, it cannot have a backer. It's 50-50. People make them both ways. I would say if you get suede, it's always best to at least have a leather lining, so you have some kind of backer. And it is a surprisingly durable, very malleable, easy to move cut that's very fuzzy. It's just very, very, very prone to water damage, so that's what most waterproofing sprays that we use these days are really meant for suede. That's their original purpose.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like a mugwai. Doesn't want to get it wet.
Nope, not unless you want stripe. We want gizmo.
Yeah, and so suede is one that you obviously you'd want a Scotch guard when you get it, if you're going to get it.
Yep, it will
And
tear
then
apart very easy getting wet.
you brought up a question. You brought up a one that I hadn't asked the question for or had written down, which is what is rough out? And rough out is a full that's reversed.
Yep.
There's a suede look to it.
Yep. And suede will be fuzzy on both sides, which once again just makes it more flexible. Why would someone want to do rough out versus suede? Ask the original Clark's Desert Boot, because when you have areas that are super sandy, flipping it made it to where the inside of the boot didn't retain the sand.
So that's all the stuff that I had written down for. It wasn't the Q&A that some people were looking for, that had asked questions in the comments of the previous videos. They have been written down as well. They're on a different list. I'll keep on writing down random questions to do for future videos, along with the comments that people have made and asked. So please keep asking the questions. Again, we're paying attention.
Yep. And then going forward, if you have a favorite brand that you have questions on, please ask it in the comments below. If we have the knowledge of it, we'll try to cover it. We are going to avoid all brands that we can't answer. Just to go ahead and level set out there, both me and Jeff are a double F width. That is 4E. If your brand you're asking about does not sell 4E, we don't own it and probably can't talk about it. So, like, right off the hop, that's no Parkhurst, no Truman, no Oak Street Bootmakers. Can talk about Grant Stone because they do have triple E, and their triple E is pretty generous. It'll easily fit a double F. But any brand, Caswell Bootmakers is another one. Anything, Red Wing included, that doesn't have 4E, we obviously don't own. We can talk about it to a certain extent. I have a little experience in trimming where I tried to make some longer sizes fit that worked absolutely not. So much so that my foot in the waist area hung almost an entire inch over the edge of the actual edge of the boot, not just the Goodyear edge, the actual edge. It doesn't work. So yes, once again, when it comes to these super wide widths, it's got to be a brand that has that. And we're even open to branching out of boots a little bit. You want me to talk about leather jackets? I have some pretty cool spoke leather jackets. That's something we can talk about if people are interested in as well. I can do one on belts. I have a pretty interesting belt collection. We can talk about that as well. The only thing that we should probably stay away from is maybe nothing about the gun collections. We'll probably leave the guns alone. So I'm sure people are going to ask, because they can see some gun related stuff up here in my background, that the people will recognize the brands pretty quickly. I'm surprised we haven't had a comment about it yet, but
it's okay to not be interested in them, but it's not okay to be offended by them.
100%.
In my opinion.
Yep. 100%.
You're offended, that's your problem, not somebody else's.
Yep.
You need to work on that. Be better.
Absolutely.
And that does it. Hour and 18 minutes.
Yeah.
Not far off from what we've been doing.
Yep. Like I said, everybody like, comment, subscribe. One other thing that might be coming that I'm still trying to figure out is I tested a 3-person kind of podcast format on Dale's channel with the Boot Talk. That kind of emulates the Full Grain podcast a little bit. It kind of worked. It had its kinks. We might try to bring it here. It's a little tougher. There's a little bit more that needs to go into it. You almost kind of need somebody that is there to ask questions, more or less. It seems to be a big portion of it. And it doesn't quite work as well with us. We're a little bit more technical deep dive. We don't cover stuff on near much of a surface. It's funny. I talk about not covering stuff on a surface level, and here we are doing kind of a surface level video.
That's what this whole video was. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I went deep into a couple things, but it was really to kind of, level set terms. But yeah, so that kind of has to exist a little bit to make that format work. So I have a person in mind, but I've only got one so far, and we'll have to try to see if we can make it work. Something may be coming. If it doesn't come, I'm sorry now. Don't hold me to it. It was a thought. I've pioneered it in a more casual space. I'm trying to bring it into the more hardcore space, so we'll see what happens.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching.
Yep.
Launcha.
Yep. See you guys later.